Cowboy rented a house for one night, but found out an Apache woman had been hiding there for weeks. James Carson was a cowboy who had spent most of his life riding across the vast plains of the Southwest. He had grown up learning how to ride horses, herd cattle, and survive in the harsh land where the sun could scorch the earth and the nights could be freezing cold. Life on the trail was never easy, but it had made him strong, independent, and cautious. On this particular day, after a long ride under the relentless sun, James was tired, hungry, and ready to find a place to rest. The small town he rode into was quiet. Most of the people were busy with their daily routines, and the streets were dusty and almost empty. As he rode past the wooden shops and weathered houses, his eyes caught sight of a small house on the outskirts of town. It looked old and simple, but there was a sign outside that read, "Room for rent." James decided it would be the perfect place to rest for the night. He tied his horse outside and knocked on the door. An elderly man opened it and gave him a wary look, but when James offered the payment, the man nodded and handed him the key. "Second room on the left," he said before closing the door slowly. The house had a quiet, empty feeling. Dust covered the floors and the wooden walls creaked with every sound of the wind. James didn't mind. All he wanted was a place to rest his tired body and maybe get some sleep before continuing his journey. He stepped inside and set his belongings down. As he walked through the living room, he noticed something odd. There was a faint smell in the air, something earthy and slightly musty, like the smell of damp soil. He paused and listened. At first he thought it was just the wind moving through the cracks in the walls. But then he heard it, a soft sound, almost like a whisper coming from the corner of the house. James froze. He had spent years on the trail, facing wild animals and bandits, and he knew when something wasn't right. Cautiously, he moved toward the sound. Behind a loose wooden panel in the corner of the living room, he saw a shadow move. His heart raced, but he didn't panic. He had faced danger before, and he knew he had to stay calm. With careful steps, he reached the panel and pushed it aside. To his surprise, a young woman appeared from the darkness. She looked frightened but alert, her eyes wide as they met his. Her clothes were tattered, and her face showed signs of exhaustion and fear. James could see that she had been hiding for a long time. Her hair was tangled, and she looked like she hadn't had a proper meal in days. She spoke a few words in a language James didn't understand at first, but then he realized she was trying to explain something. She was an Apache woman, and she had been hiding in the house for weeks. Soldiers and bounty hunters were searching for her tribe, and she had escaped to survive. James felt a mix of emotions. He was surprised, cautious, and a little afraid, but he also felt compassion. The woman, whose name was Nijoni, was clearly in danger, and he knew he couldn't just leave her there. He decided to speak gently to her, hoping to earn her trust. He explained that he meant no harm and that he was willing to help her if she would let him. Nijoni was hesitant at first. She had been hiding from strangers for so long that trusting someone felt impossible, but something in James' calm and careful manner made her feel she could take a small risk. They spent the rest of the evening cautiously talking. James asked her about her tribe, her journey, and how she ended up hiding in the house. Nijoni spoke slowly, in broken English, telling him about the raid that scattered her family and the dangers she had faced on her own. She explained how she had to move quietly and avoid anyone who might recognize her. James listened carefully, realizing how much courage it must have taken for her to survive alone for so long. As they shared their stories, James began to feel a strange connection with Nijoni. Despite the differences in their lives and backgrounds, they both understood what it meant to survive in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. James thought about his life as a cowboy, constantly traveling, facing danger, and living with uncertainty. He realized that Nijoni's struggle, though very different from his, had a similar thread of bravery and resilience. The night grew darker, and the wind outside howled through the cracks of the old house. Shadows moved across the walls, and the floorboards creaked under their feet. James felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew that helping Nijoni could bring danger to him as well, but he couldn't ignore someone in need. She had trusted him enough to reveal herself, and he intended to honor that trust. As they prepared to settle down for the night, James made a careful inspection of the house. He checked the doors and windows to make sure they were secure, giving Nijoni a sense of safety for the first time in weeks. They shared a simple meal he had brought with him, some bread and dried meat, and she ate cautiously, still unsure if she was truly safe. James didn't rush her. He understood that trust takes time, and he was willing to wait. Before going to sleep, James and Nijoni talked quietly about their plans. She was afraid of being discovered in the morning, and he promised to think of a way to help her. The thought of the dangerous world outside the small, dusty house weighed on both of them. They knew that once daylight came, their choices would be limited, and they would have to decide whether to stay hidden or find a way to escape together. Despite the fear and uncertainty, there was a sense of hope in the room. Nijoni realized that not all strangers were dangerous, and James understood that bravery could also mean helping someone who had no one else. The night passed slowly, with James keeping watch while Nijoni slept, listening for any sounds that might signal danger. He thought about how a simple decision to rent a house for one night had turned into a life-changing event. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the walls, James knew that their story was just beginning. Nijoni had survived weeks on her own, and now, with his help, she had a chance to be safe again. But the world outside the house was full of threats, and they both understood that staying hidden forever was impossible. The story of that night was not just about hiding or danger. It was about trust, courage, and the unexpected bonds that form when two people face uncertainty together. James had learned that bravery doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it means standing by someone who needs you, even when the risks are high. Nijoni had learned that help can come from unexpected places, and that hope can survive even in the darkest times. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm golden light across the dusty floors, James and Nijoni prepared themselves for what was to come. They would have to move carefully, make smart choices, and rely on each other's strengths. The night had tested them, and now the day would challenge them in ways they could not yet imagine. But one thing was certain: neither of them would face it alone. That first night in the old house had changed everything. James, who had intended only to rest, had become a protector. Nijoni, who had hidden in fear, had found an ally. The connection between them, fragile but growing, would guide the decisions they made in the coming days. And though neither could predict the future, both felt a quiet determination to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. The first light of dawn spilled through the cracks in the old house, painting the dusty floors with a warm, golden glow. James Carson stood quietly by the window, listening to the sounds of the town waking up. He could see a few townspeople moving in the distance, but for now, no one seemed aware of the secret hidden in the small, worn-down house. Nijoni, the Apache woman, had just woken up. Her eyes were cautious, scanning the room for any signs of danger. She had survived weeks of hiding alone, but now she felt something different, a strange mixture of hope and trust in James. James knew that staying in the house any longer would be too risky. Soldiers and bounty hunters might arrive at any moment, and Nijoni would be in grave danger if she was discovered. He spoke softly, explaining that they needed to leave as soon as possible and find a safer place for her. Nijoni nodded, understanding the urgency. She had learned to trust her instincts, and she could tell that James was serious about keeping her safe. They packed only the essentials, a small amount of food, water, and a few supplies Nijoni had kept hidden. James led the way out of the house, checking every direction to ensure no one was watching. Nijoni followed closely, her movements cautious but sure. Despite the tension in the air, there was a silent understanding between them. They were no longer strangers. They were partners in survival, relying on each other to face the dangers that lay ahead. As they moved through the town, James kept a close eye on their surroundings. The streets were quiet, but every shadow and sound made him alert. Nijoni guided him through narrow alleyways and hidden paths, showing him the secret routes she had used while hiding. Her knowledge of the land was invaluable. She pointed out places where they could hide if someone spotted them and reminded James of the safest ways to move quietly. The sun climbed higher in the sky, making the journey even more difficult. The plains were wide and open, offering little cover, and the heat was intense. James led their horse along the trails, careful to avoid leaving obvious tracks. Nijoni rode behind him, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Every rustle of grass or movement in the distance made them pause, hearts pounding. They knew that danger could appear at any moment, and they had to stay alert. As the day progressed, the landscape changed. The open plains gave way to hills and canyons, providing more places to hide. James suggested they rest for a short while in a small canyon shaded by tall rock formations. Here, they could eat, drink, and regain some energy before continuing. While James tended to the horse, Nijoni gathered small sticks and stones to create a simple alarm system, a warning in case someone approached. Her survival skills amazed James. Despite everything she had been through, she remained calm, focused, and resourceful. During their brief rest, they shared a quiet moment by a small stream. The sound of running water was soothing, and for a moment the danger felt distant. James looked at Nijoni and realized how strong she was. She had endured fear, hunger, and loneliness, yet she had survived. Her eyes held a quiet determination, and James felt a deep respect for her courage. They spoke softly, exchanging stories of their past. Nijoni talked about her family, her tribe, and the traditions she cherished. James shared tales of his life on the trail, of long rides, and the hardships of a cowboy's life. Though their worlds were different, they found common ground in their resilience and desire to survive. As the afternoon sun began to lower, they continued their journey. They moved cautiously, taking hidden paths through the hills and canyons. The threat of discovery was never far from their minds. At one point, James spotted a group of men on horseback in the distance, riding in the direction of the town they had left. He quickly signaled to Nijoni, and they ducked behind a large boulder, holding their breath as the men passed by. The tension was palpable, but their careful planning and alertness allowed them to avoid detection. Night approached, and the temperature dropped. They found a small cave tucked away in the hills to rest for the night. James lit a small fire, careful to keep it low so it wouldn't attract attention. Nijoni stayed close, her eyes scanning the darkness outside. The stars above were bright, and the quiet of the night was a welcome relief after the day's constant vigilance. They shared a simple meal, and James noticed how Nijoni's spirits seemed to lift slightly. She had survived so much, and now, for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of safety, even if it was temporary. During the night, they talked quietly by the fire. Nijoni shared stories of her tribe, of celebrations, dances, and the strong bonds within her community. James listened intently, fascinated by the rich history and traditions she described. He realized that her story was not just one of survival, but also of culture, strength, and resilience. In turn, James shared his experiences of life on the trail, of the loneliness and freedom that came with it. Their bond grew stronger with every story, every shared glance, and every moment of trust. The following day, they resumed their journey. The terrain became rougher, with rocky paths and steep inclines. Their muscles ached and the sun was harsh, but neither complained. They knew that reaching a safe place was more important than comfort. Nijoni guided James to a hidden canyon, a place where members of her tribe had once taken refuge. The journey was long and exhausting, but every step brought them closer to safety. Along the way, they encountered more obstacles. A sudden storm forced them to take shelter under a rocky overhang. The wind and rain made movement difficult, and James had to use all his strength and experience to keep the horse steady. Nijoni helped by finding safe spots and keeping them calm. They worked together seamlessly, each relying on the other's skills and instincts. Finally, after days of careful travel, they reached the hidden canyon where some of Najoni's distant relatives were waiting. The reunion was quiet but filled with relief. Najoni's eyes glistened with gratitude as she was welcomed back into a small circle of safety. James felt a sense of accomplishment and quiet satisfaction. He had risked his own safety to help someone in need, and it had paid off. Before leaving, Najoni thanked James sincerely. Though words could not fully express her gratitude, her eyes spoke volumes. James knew that their paths might never cross again, but the experience had changed him. He had learned that courage is not just about facing danger, but also about compassion, trust, and the willingness to help those who cannot defend themselves. As James rode away from the canyon, the sun setting behind the hills, he reflected on the journey. A simple decision to rent a house for one night had led to an adventure that tested his skills, his courage, and his heart. He realized that life was full of unexpected encounters, and sometimes, the people we meet can leave a lasting impact on our lives. The story ended with hope and resilience. Najoni was safe, surrounded by her people, and James continued his journey across the plains. Forever changed by the night he discovered a hidden Apache woman in a rented house. The bond they had formed in the face of danger was a reminder that bravery, kindness, and trust can emerge even in the harshest of times.